What do you think is the secret appeal as a new party in the Western Cape as a whole, South Africa as a whole? What do you think is the appeal for that?
The appeal for what?
The appeal of a new party in South Africa. What do you think the appeal would be?
I think that what we're seeing, and I don't think it would be surprising to either of you, that voters and South Africans, and maybe even around the world, voters and people who participate in democracy are increasingly disillusioned with politics as usual, with politicians, with the kind of promises that politicians make and then never deliver on. And so, I mean, a new party is an opportunity to give those people who are disillusioned some hope that actually maybe there is an alternative, and it can be an authentic alternative, and the people who are involved are legitimately and sincerely concerned about change, and are not in it simply for their own line their own pockets or to get a salary. So I think what I'm seeing is an opportunity for a new party which has got experience in government and in local government to demonstrate that there is a viable alternative to the old parties. I mean, there's a couple of things. If you think about a couple of things, it's in 1991 the Group Areas Act was abolished, and yet 30 years later we've had not a single government. Both the DA and the ANC have governed Cape Town and the Western Cape, have addressed the spatial. The whole philosophy of apartheid was separating us according to race into our little enclaves, and that has not been addressed in 30 years in Cape Town or the Western Cape, and in other parts of the country, maybe not to the same extent that it's so entrenched here. So I think it's easier for us to go out to a community and say, just look at the last 15 years in the city of Cape Town. We've had the same government now for 15 years. Has your life got better? And if you were to leave those people in charge or in government for another 5 years, your next opportunity to change your government and to bring change is in 2026. So, we're offering a viable alternative, but rooted in some experience and some realistic policy proposals.
So, Brett, no, you mentioned the spatial apartheid and the fighting against that. And historically, Cape Town, both before democracy and post-democracy, it's been split between the haves and the have-nots, oftentimes along racial lines. Now, on day one, imagine Mayor Brett Herron. What would your program be to integrate the city?
So, I mean, I've got like a couple of things that I do on day one. But with regards to integration, the first thing I would do is go back to that 2017 call for proposals that we released when I was responsible for housing and for spatial planning and transport, when we merged all those functions together. The purpose of merging those functions together was to address the spatial apartheid legacy that we still are stuck with in Cape Town. So the first thing I'll do is to brush off that prospectus that we issued in September 2017, and to which 13 private sector developers and partnering with social housing companies responded to, and re-release it so that those 5 pieces of land at least are on track. Well, not on track, but get kind of kick-started. So that's the first thing I'll do. And maybe, we will add 1 or 2 sites that we were looking at further down the pipeline, and get 5, 6, 7 sites released immediately in the inner city to address spatial integration. And then I would retable the inclusionary housing plan or policy document that I was leading. We drafted it in collaboration with organizations like Ndufuna Kwazi, but including private developers, academics from UCT. So there's an inclusionary housing policy that is ready to go, and I would get that out into the public space for public comment. That's where I left it off in the city. So we'll release the land, identify the additional land that was in the pipeline, which I still have a record of, and put out the inclusionary housing policy framework for public participation so we can get that approved as a mandatory inclusionary housing policy.
Okay, that's it's pretty much picking up where you left off in the city of Cape Town. Why do you think the city of Cape Town has not implemented these things in the period of time that they've been the governing party?
Well, I mean, those are good questions to ask because, I mean, the DA governed the city since 2006. Okay, 2006 was a DA-led coalition, but it was, I mean, by the end of it, it was regarded as a DA government. And in the province for 12 years. And in 2012, so that was like 3 years into their first term of office in province, the provincial government released an inner city regeneration plan, which identified about 6 provincial government sites that they wanted to release to the public or release for public proposals for development. And in that, their prospectus, they refer to integration, they refer to affordable housing. So way back in 2012, they published this thing, but they never followed through with it.
Yeah.
And so the closest we got to actually addressing this head on was the prospectus that I released in September 2017. It was released formally, those 5 sites, and we received 13 bids by February 2018. And, you know, I was on those sites. I've been on those sites 2 or 3 times in the last couple of weeks. And those sites should be construction sites now. There should be tens of thousands of units being developed. So I think they have an ideological or a party political funding obstacle to implementing these programs. Because as I say, in 2012, they put out a kind of prospectus that they never followed through with. And in 2017, when we issued that prospectus and got a really positive response, I think a really exciting response, 13 bids on 5 sites. I thought that was it was more than I expected. That was when the fight started, and that fight was what led to Good being formed. And 2 months after Patricia de Lille and I and several others resigned from the city of Cape Town and from the DA, they formally cancelled that inner city affordable housing project. So I think it's either it's ideological. There is an ideological component. I was in a meeting shortly after I released those sites where Helen Ziller said that using well-located land to provide affordable housing was over-subsidizing some people because they now have more valuable affordable housing than the people who are living on the outskirts of the city in B&G housing. But so that was maybe an ideological position. But I mean, I'm also aware of party political funding interventions as well. I think if I just want to say that if anyone thinks that Helen Ziller was correct when she said that there's an over-subsidization, that is a misunderstanding of what we were offering, because those units would have been rental accommodation and they would have been affordable in perpetuity, but they would have served several families over their lifespan because families will move on. So those units would not have over-subsidized anybody because several families over maybe 100 years would have used those units.
Yes. Well, I think Jay is having some difficulty with the internet, and I can tell he's kicking himself at the moment. But I wanted to ask you about the campaign and how that's going. I see on social media, you guys are going into the areas that the DA and the ANC and other political parties, let's be honest, they aren't welcome, and mainly on the Cape Flats. What do you think is the appeal on the Cape Flats, and why are you targeting these areas?
So I mean, let me say, I mean, we are contesting all 116 wards in the city of Cape Town. So there's political activity in all of those wards, and obviously, and to different degrees, because some candidates are more motivated than others, some are more organized than others. But so we're not. I mean, so it's not that we're targeting a particular area and ignoring the others. But I mean, I'm going to communities like on the Cape Flats and in the old townships and in informal settlements to reach out to those voters to vote for us, because they're the most accessible, to be honest.
Yeah.
You know, it's very hard in affluent communities to access voters because they're high walls and they don't answer they don't answer the doorbell if you ring it. So I'm going where the voters are accessible, and where in the most densely populated parts of our city. So that's where the voters are, because those communities, the Cape Flats communities, the old townships, the informal settlements, are densely populated parts of our city, so that you can reach more people and they are more accessible, and maybe they are more welcoming. I mean, they are very, very welcoming, and I haven't ended a single day of my campaigning discouraged by anything that has happened on the day. So people are open, they're open to hearing the ideas, they are saying they're going to support us. Whether they do or not, we'll see on the 1st of November. But we're getting a good response, and we're getting people who, if I may use the word, are themselves saying we're hutful for the DA. So I'm hoping that translates into votes on the 1st of November. And I keep reminding them that if they don't use the 1st of November as an opportunity to make change, they'll be stuck with the DA for another 5 years.
So the Cape Flats is one of the most unsafe areas in the world. I remember you mentioning this specifically in the mayoral debate. What do you think of the city of Cape Town's plan to allocate 1.4 billion rand to rookie cops to fight this? This is like sending children in it's like 6 to go and become prefects in matric, like as 12-year-olds. It doesn't make sense. Like, what's your feelings on that?
So let's go back to I think it was on the eve of SONA, where I think first of all Alan Winde was trying to steal a bit of thunder. So I
remember that.
He announced that tomorrow, like the day after SONA or whatever, that he was going to announce the biggest, boldest, most expensive safety plan in South Africa's history. And then there was this press conference where a PowerPoint presentation was made, and it promised 3,000 additional police officers that would be rolled out in the 10 most dangerous crime precincts in Cape Town, or in the Western Cape, they said, but they all happen to be in Cape Town. And they were going to halve the murder rate over a period of 10 years. And so that was the announcement. And I was suspicious already when someone starts talking about biggest, boldest. And I know Alan quite well. He likes announcements. He likes to make big announcements. But when you scratch below the surface, there's not a lot of substance. So this announcement was made, and then I started asking questions in Parliament, where's the safety plan? Because you've presented this very bold announcement, but where's the detail of the plan? And it took a couple of weeks and a lot of questions to get what is called a draft Western Cape safety framework. It's about 25 pages long, and it looks like desktop research. And it is based on that the provincial government has scraped from other departments, which are its key mandates and its core mandates, 1.3 or 1.4 billion rand, which they intend to transfer to the city of Cape Town over 4 financial years. So the city of Cape Town's already received about 900 million of it. So that is the Western Cape Safety Plan, and that just didn't make sense to me. But you have to read the Western Cape Safety Plan together with what the city put before council in order to accept that 1.4 billion rand worth of funding. and that's called the Law Enforcement Auxiliary or Advancement Plan. I can't remember, but the acronym LEAP. When you read LEAP, that document, that's what Council, the City of Cape Town approved. The 3,000 police officers morph into 1,000 learner law enforcement officers who go through
6 weeks of training is not much.
No, they go through 6 weeks training, and they're going to be deployed in these teams of 10 or what into the 10 most hot, the 10 crime hotspots. That document is so confusing because it's in different parts. It identifies different precincts where they're going to deploy these learner law enforcement officers. So here's my problem. First of all, we can do a lot more with 1.4 billion rand to address crime and safety if we invested in the built environment in which people live and the social conditions in which people live and the unemployment that drives crime and antisocial behavior. It is telling communities who live in extremely dangerous conditions with gangsterism that they are safer because there's this 1,000 law enforcement officers now roaming their streets. So they should feel safer. So giving people a false sense of safety, which maybe, and I'm assuming now, let people let their guard down a bit, because people who live in those communities are aware of crime and gangsterism and the dangers when they are out and about, out of their homes. And if you're suddenly told that there's 1,000 extra police officers wandering around making you safe, it maybe creates a very dangerous kind of environment for those people because they let their guard down. So I think that this 1.4 billion rand safety plan is reckless and it's irresponsible, and it's the greatest con that is being perpetuated or forced onto poor communities who now think maybe that there's these extra police officers who are going to make them safe. So it's a flawed plan from start to finish. It focuses on policing, but even the policing is amateurish. It is learner law enforcement officers. It places these young people who are desperate for an opportunity to work, places their lives at risk because they're not properly trained to deal with crime and the kind of crime that they're expected to deal with. They are expected to halve the murder rate in the most dangerous precincts in South Africa, if not the world, with 6 weeks of training. A South African Police Services constable, learner constable, has had 12 months of training. So I think it's reckless, it's irresponsible, and it's a con.
Well, I have to ask then, that's a problematic plan. What would be your plan as mayor for the city of Cape Town for safety and security?
So I think that we must, obviously there is a role for enforcement and policing. I can't say that we don't need policing, but there are really good precedents that have been set in other parts of the world. And if you look at Colombia, which was a country that had the same kinds of socioeconomic conditions that gave rise to the same kind of criminal activity in kind of ghetto-like environments.
Yeah.
And they went to the root causes of crime rather than trying to catch the criminals after the crime has been committed. So if I had 1.4 billion rand to throw at crime, I would address the infrastructure, I would address the lack of community facilities, I would address the lack of training opportunities for young people, and in the process, I would address the lack of employment. So I would invest in infrastructure, changing the built environment so that it is a more dignified environment that is more conducive to social cohesion and to young people being productive. So either participating in training programs or participating in sports and recreational programs that are rolled out in decent, dignified community facilities. I'd be investing in the environments where there is such low levels of investment, such underdevelopment. So those kind of social built environment and social conditions that create the conditions conducive to young people being absorbed or conscripted into gangs and crime. We need to address those conditions. So let's go to the root causes of crime, which is the socioeconomic conditions and the built environment conditions in those hotspots.
So, Brett, I've got one more question for you, I think that you're in a unique position to answer this question. You drive down the road and you see your face on the posters, and you're the focus of a mayoral campaign. What has that been like for you personally? What is the experience of campaigning for mayor? What's it been like to live that campaign life?
You've broken up a bit there, Roscoe.
So what's it been like for you to live that campaign life, to be the face of a mayoral campaign?
Well, look, I mean, to be the mayoral candidate is one thing, but remember the end goal is actually to be the mayor. So, and that is, I mean, first of all, it's a huge privilege to lead a campaign and to have the opportunity to contest to lead a city like Cape Town. I mean, Cape Town is a very special city. I mean, it's got huge challenges, but to have the opportunity to contest for that leadership role in our city is a huge privilege. And I always regarded being in office as a privilege. I used to sit and think, I'm the mayoral committee member for transport. I serve on a 10-member executive committee that leads one of the greatest cities in the world. Despite all its challenges, I believe the true nature of Cape Town is one of the greatest cities of the world. We just have a government that doesn't seem to be able to access our potential. And I used to sit in that 10-member committee thinking, I've got like one of these positions, and there's only one of these positions in the whole world, and I occupy it. So with that privilege comes a huge responsibility if you actually believe it's a privilege to serve. And so I'm humbled and I'm privileged, and I know it's a massive responsibility to lead the campaign, but it would be even a bigger responsibility to be elected as mayor, because there's so many people that I've come across who are look to me with hope that I will change their lives. So the campaign trail has been really humbling. I mean, I haven't lived with my head in the sand. I know the conditions that people live under, but to come to face with people whose lives need an intervention, and they're relying on government to open doorways and open obstacles or remove obstacles to progress, and they look at you as your as almost a last hope. It's a very humbling experience. But what has been maybe the most impactful experience has been the level of poverty and hunger and how it has changed in the last 2 or 3 years, to where Cape Town is probably, and I believe the stats bear this out, the most food insecure city in our country. And I was in KTC section in Nyanga, an informal settlement in Nyanga. And I went there because the city hadn't cleared the portaloos for 10 days. So this informal settlement was drowning in human feces. And I intervened. And then I went back to the community after the city cleaned up, and the community leaders took me from shack to shack, asking me to try and intervene with some people's problems. And there were 2 things that struck me. First of all, or 3 things. First of all, that the community leadership were all women. Secondly, they live in that same community and they live in those same conditions, but they were able to identify people within that community who were worse off than them, and they were asking me to help those people. And then thirdly, something that I will never forget for the rest of my life, I was taken to a shack where there was this 28-year-old man who lived in this shack, and he spoke Xhosa, and the conversation went on and on and on. And then at the end, the community leader said, no, they can't tell me what he said. And I literally had to beg them to tell me what he said. And what he said to them was that he is so hungry and so poor that he has to slaughter cats and dogs sometimes to eat. And that level of poverty and hunger in a city like Cape Town with so much wealth, and even where we have an administration that's got 19 billion rand in the bank, is just a level of poverty that as a leader of a city you cannot ignore. I mean, if you go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you start with people must have food, must have some sort of income. So that was the most impactful thing for me as on this campaign trail, was that, and it has kind of adjusted maybe my priorities if I was to be elected, that I could not sit in that on the 6th floor in the Civic Center in that beautiful mayoral suite, knowing that there was people out there who were relying on slaughtering what they think are stray cats and dogs, could be someone's pet, in order to eat. And we would have to address hunger as a starting point. If I'm going to lead a city, that would be like one of the first things we would have to address.